Do we need to take roll? I think we can get going, work on that one. So the next item, agenda item 4B, has to deal with the amount of cannabis goods that can be carried by delivery vehicles. The question for the advisory committee: should the Bureau change the amount of cannabis goods that a retail driver, a delivery employee, may carry, or use a different standard of measurement to determine delivery vehicle limits? Should the regulations set different limits for cannabis goods that are not part of an order received and processed prior to leaving the retail premises? Current law, California Code of Regulations, Title 16, Section 5418, prohibits a delivery employee from carrying more than 5,000 of cannabis goods. Of the 5,000 limit, only 3,000 may be of cannabis goods that are not part of an order that was received and processed prior to departure from the licensed premise. The retail price of the cannabis goods is used to determine the value for this purpose. Considerations: current limits were established to minimize the risk of theft or loss of cannabis goods. Higher limits would mean that the amount of cannabis goods carried in delivery vehicles is potentially larger and may increase the risk of theft or diversion. Additionally, any standard used to determine limits should be easy to verify so that law enforcement can make proper determinations regarding whether the delivery vehicle has the appropriate amount of cannabis goods. Utilizing a tiered structure or calculations that cannot readily be determined by visual inspection will likely be confusing for law enforcement and may lead to inconsistent enforcement. Further, limits on the amount of cannabis goods that can be delivered in the delivery vehicle, which have not been already processed prior to leaving the licensed premise, should avoid the delivery service from essentially becoming a mobile retailer. Sorry about that, I butchered that last sentence. So further limits on the amount of cannabis goods that can be in the delivery vehicle which have not been already processed prior to leaving the licensed premise should avoid the delivery service from essentially becoming a mobile retailer. So with that, I open it up for committee members for comment.
Any committee members wishing to make a comment, please go ahead and raise your hand. Chair, I'm seeing no committee members with their hands raised.
This is Committee Member Cermak, again, having trouble finding my hands. I'm just curious about any data regarding how many thefts have occurred among delivery services.
Committee member Yu, I see that your hand is raised. You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
In areas that have bans on storefront retailers, delivery may be the only option for a lot of Californians who can't leave their homes to purchase cannabis. And as we know, the pandemic is only exacerbating this need as many Californians continue to shelter in place. So, I'm curious about the data question as well to see if this shows any statistically significant increase in risk. And, if it doesn't, then it would make sense to increase this cap. And, based on the comments we received from the public, there is support from social equity operators as well. So I believe it's generally just important that we don't place barriers to access, and we want to ensure that legal demand is met to prevent illicit sales across the state.
Thank you, Committee Member Yu. Committee Member Boboyan, I see that your hand is raised. You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you. On this one, I'm a little conflicted, but here are the general considerations that I'm thinking about. Normally, for me, it's not as much of a public safety issue as it is an issue as far as a couple of other things. The whole mobile dispensary thing is the first thing that comes to mind. $5,000 worth of product is a lot of product. I mean, if you look at most of the dispensaries, they're not doing $5,000 in a day. So for a delivery service to be allowed $5,000 per vehicle to go out, you're just inviting that whole argument from the cities about the whole mobile dispensary, ice cream truck model and stuff like that. There's nothing that prevents a delivery service from loading up a couple of vehicles with more than $5,000 worth of product that's not sold and just simply driving around waiting for somebody to place that order. So for me, that's a lot bigger of an issue than the whole public safety thing. It's just unfair competition for a lot of the dispensaries that do have a lot more overhead and expenses associated with running a dispensary than a delivery service. So that's one side of it. The other part of it is, again, wanting to expand opportunity for the industry across all the different categories as much as possible. Right now, we have to take into consideration that there's a pretty big fight going on between the cities and the state. And this is a really big touchy subject in that fight. The whole conversation about local control and the local jurisdictions having the right to ban it. By expanding on this, I think we're just taking away a lot of arguments that the Bureau already has in their fight against the cities. Are we making their job a lot more difficult? And are we just giving more ammo to the cities in their argument with the whole mobile dispensary concept, the ice cream truck model? Of the 5,000 or whatever that limit ends up being, when it's all said and done, I think the issue is more about regulating how much product is in the vehicle that's not sold versus how much product is in the vehicle that's already sold and the orders are already in and they're simply being delivered to the destination, to the customer. So those are just some things to think about and some of the considerations I'm having and some of the conflicts I'm having with this part of it. Personally, I think the limits as they are right now are perfectly fine. And the reason is, like I said, you don't have too many dispensaries that are doing over $5,000 in sales in an entire day, let alone the vehicle being allowed more than $5,000 to just simply drive around waiting for orders to come in. On the retail side, it's going to be, this is just a way for them to end up cannibalizing it through the retail outlet, through the delivery chain of it. So just some things to consider.
Thank you, Committee Member Baboulian. Vice Chair Heidelbach, I see that your hand is raised. You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi there, thank you. I just wanted to wholeheartedly agree with some of the points that Member Baboulian made. I agree that $5,000 worth of product is a lot. I have some other concerns. One being, and someone correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe that all the delivery folks have paper manifest, which I think can allow folks to divert product. I am in support of delivery, but I do think that increasing the amount of product that they're moving isn't going to help us.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Are there any other committee members that wish to make a comment at this time? If so, please raise your hand. Moderator, can you unmute Committee Member Cermak just so I can check if he has any additional comments?
I'm sorry, no, my hand is not up.
Thank you. Chair, I see no additional comments from members.
Well, if we don't have a motion from anybody, then I'll open this up to public comment, and then we'll relook at possible motion. Cermak did raise his hand.
Committee Member Cermak, do you have an additional comment? If so, moderator, can I have you unmute Committee Member Cermak?
I'm sorry. No, I'm no more comments now.
Okay.
So this is Member Clifford. I apologize for not raising my hand. I'm fumbling with the software here, but I just want to give a heads up that I'm going to have to drop off the meeting at 3 o'clock, and I think you still have a quorum if I'm the only one, but want to give a heads up. Thanks.
This is the moderator, just making sure I understood correctly. Did you want me to open it up for public comment?
Yes, please, moderator.
I have opened the Q&A feature. If you would like to make a public comment, please click on the bottom of your screen, the Q&A icon, and type, "I would like to make a public comment," and send to all panelists. I will take all comments in the order they are received. First public comment comes from an individual identified as William Perno. Your microphone has been unmuted.
Thank you. I would just like to note that historically, initially with the rules, there was no extra marijuana allowed on the vehicles. Now it's been increased to $5,000. And I agree with the other committee members that are stating that's a lot of marijuana. My concerns are diversion to youth, employee theft. You do have a public safety issue here with theft or robberies. And yes, there have been theft or robberies of licensed marijuana businesses. I am aware of that from marijuana business owners themselves. You also now, through the BCC rules that one of the committee members noted, is going through litigation, have opened up delivery to anywhere in California. So if you increase the amount of marijuana that's not tagged to a particular customer to greater than $5,000, what you're really doing is allowing greater delivery range for those vehicles to anywhere throughout a county or into another county through that delivery model that the BCC is allowing. And you're going to have competition with other licensed cannabis businesses. In other words, they're going to be able to encroach into areas. Yes, I am in favor of delivery services, but the amount of marijuana those vehicles have on board, track and trace, having tight control over that inventory so that it can't be diverted, can't be stolen by employees, get into the hands of youth, or be a target for theft or robberies. And criminal gangs will surveil a business and follow those vehicles and will move to take them down. And you're just giving them a larger target there the more marijuana you put into that vehicle, including the more cash that's coming back with that vehicle after.
Time had been met. Our next public comment comes from an individual identified as Eddie Franco. Your microphone has been unmuted. You are unmuted, Eddie. Moving on to our next public comment comes from a Rashad Johnson. Your microphone has been unmuted.
Hello, thank you. Good afternoon. Dear Cannabis Advisory Committee, East Technology respectfully urges the Cannabis Advisory Committee reversion of delivery case limits to 10K. We want to reinforce that EASE adamantly supports the agenda item 4B discussion and looks forward to working with the Bureau of Cannabis Control to help justify the need for increased case limits. EASE has had a 0.003 incident rate and often is safer than traditional pizza delivery businesses. As you are aware, no evidence supports the claim that cannabis delivery threatens public safety. To the contrary, data shows delivery to be a safe and consistent mechanism for adult Californians to buy legal, a fact reinforced by the home delivery's designation as essential. Under current regulations, 80% of California cannabis sales are controlled by unlicensed operators who do not follow the important labor protections required by cannabis regulations. If the legal market cannot meet consumer demand, illicit enterprises will continue to thumb their noses at policymakers, labor unions, law enforcement, and small business owners. According to the Sacramento Bee, approximately 60% of Californians must drive 50 miles or more to find a licensed cannabis retailer. In order for licensees to service these cannabis deserts, case limits must be increased. As added benefits, higher case limits will increase tax revenue and decrease environmental impact of delivery operations. Increasing case packing limits, which are currently set too low to meet public demand for legal cannabis, is of critical importance to legal retailers, brands, and the consumers who rely on tested products. The $5,000 ceiling forces delivery drivers to return repeatedly to retailers each day. Case limits also do not equal less products. It simply creates more inefficiencies as drivers have to return to the license.
A minute and a half had been reached. Our next public comment comes from an individual identified as Tony Bowles. Your microphone has been unmuted. Tony, you are unmuted.
Delivery. Tony Bowles, Bay Area Chapter of Americans for Safe Access. We would like to see delivery case limits increase from 5,000 to 10,000, which was the original limit set by the state. because it will help patients who are finding it difficult to obtain cannabis they rely on as medicine. 90% of California cannabis consumers report using it for medicinal purposes. The state's regulations were not designed to work in the midst of the pandemic. Local bans on cannabis retailers in 85% of communities means patients must rely on delivery or risk COVID exposure. 60% of Californians live over an hour away from a legal dispensary, making it extremely challenging, if not completely unfeasible. Because of this situation, much of the state is lacking access to essential cannabis delivery. Raising case limits will help address this problem. We strongly urge the Bureau to restore cannabis delivery case limits to $10,000, which will allow licensed retailers to supply more patients with safe, legal, tested products in access across the state. Thank you.
Next, we have Rand Martin. Your microphone has been unmuted.
Thank you. Rand Martin here on behalf of Caliba. First, I'd like to align our comments with those presented by Ease. We agree, especially those comments relative to concerns about the illegal market filling the gap that the legal market cannot fill because of regulations. I would like to express two additional concerns. One is relative to this issue about mobile retailing, as if cannabis delivery services are like ice cream trucks that can drive up and down the street playing Pop Goes the Weasel and attracting anybody who wants to come up to the door and purchase a product. It is far too regulated under track and trace to ever be that kind of a model. So the argument about mobile retailing just does not hold water in this case. The other is a comment made by one of the earlier public comments about going into other counties if you have too much product in your truck, and covering other jurisdictions that you might not cover with a 5,000 limit. That is not possible either under current Bureau regulations, because there are time limits on how long you can be out, how long you can have between deliveries. That's a
20 seconds.
That's a 30-minute time limit. You cannot be out sitting around for an hour or longer waiting for product to come in. Thank you.
Our next public comment comes from Marnie. Your microphone has been unmuted.
Hi there. Thanks again for listening. I request that you consider the carbon footprint and our environmental impact. We have to start thinking about the earth. We have to. We need to have a positive effect, not a negative effect. $5,000 is not necessarily a lot. If the average cost of a ticket is $50, that's 100 people. 100 people in a city of thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions. So that should be considered. And I think it's really bizarre that law enforcement may be inconsistent. Like it's inconsistent now, but if it's properly organized and all the proper paperwork is there, it should be easy to inventory. How many of these cars have been pulled over? They're
20
unmarked.
seconds.
What are they being pulled over for? It's really important to keep cannabis available. It's natural medicine. Thank you.
Next, we have Robert Jones. Your microphone has been unmuted.
Thank you again, and I really appreciate everyone here. I feel we definitely should increase it, because right now the dispensaries have to pivot and do delivery. At the same time, the industry knows the risk. They've been involved in this risk for a long time. Secondly, the robberies have been up dramatically. Some reported, some do not, because of insurance issues. We need enforcement. The San Francisco Police Department, there was a big robbery of several entities in San Francisco during the protest, the George Floyd protest, and these gangsters are very smart, and they're taking advantage. So I think we need to help the industry again, maybe make it temporary, and so that these dispensaries can get their delivery and everybody else can get involved. So increase it, or maybe have 2 people in a van, because having one person driving back and forth, that's a big risk because people can follow them. So we know, like I said, think outside the box. Let's get this done. Let's help these people. People are suffering out there. Thank you.
Next, we have Max Michelanis. Your microphone has been unmuted.
Great, thank you. Max Michelanis on behalf of Flow Cannabis Company. I want to reiterate the state has taken a position in support of delivery, both through the creation of a delivery-only license and with the Delivery Freedom Regulation, Section 32B, with the Delivery Freedom Regulation, which this committee also did support when that was being proposed. Increasing the carrying capacity for delivery vehicles is consistent with the state's support for consumer access, patient access, and during this time of COVID and the public health implications, delivery is much more prevalent and needs to, there's a special need at this point for increased carrying capacity. Flow Cannabis Company supports a tiered model with a capacity of at least $10,000. This would allow for a scheduled delivery model akin to a wine club where orders are placed in advance, and then there are fewer vehicles with higher amounts that are scheduling and delivering on a route, for example. Additionally, a tiered model will allow for a lower tier that could include 2-wheel delivery, which would have a lower carbon footprint as referenced. There is a question
20
as to
seconds.
the ability of law enforcement to currently calculate the amount being carried by licensees, simply because they'll have to rely on the manifest as it stands, and that would not change if the capacity was higher. Thank you.
Next, we have Nasser Azimi. Your microphone has been unmuted.
Good afternoon. This is Nasser Azimi, co-founder of Ohana Cannabis. We have a mix of storefront and non-storefront licenses across the state. And in that context, we have across-the-board experience with the challenges, but also the winning formulas associated with delivery. Completely respect and acknowledge the concerns out there. Don't want to devalue or dispute any of that. However, there are ways to mitigate the concerns and the risks. As an example, Ohana uses corporate vehicles. We retrofit every vehicle with 360-degree surveillance cameras inside and outside. So in that context, drivers as well as our remote dispatch have full view of the activities surrounding and inside the vehicles. And we also really take a lot of steps to make sure that both the drivers as well as the customers are fully protected. And in some cases, our delivery personnel use body cams. So there are ways to really create absolute transparency across the board to mitigate some of the concerns that I heard over this conversation. One thing I want to point out is that distribution entities
20
carry
seconds.
significant amount of inventory on board without major issues. This issue definitely needs to be resolved because it fuels the illicit market and it does not create any competitive disadvantage for dispensaries who have the same opportunity to operate deliveries scenarios.
Next, we have Khurshid Koha. Your microphone has been unmuted.
Thank you, moderator. Khurshid Koja, Greenbridge Corporate Counsel, would agree with the notion that increasing case limits will address cannabis deserts. I think we need to increase case limits for that reason. One would generally agree with the comments made by Caliba, Flow Cannabis Company, ASA, and EASE as well, and hope that the committee will endorse increasing case limits. Thank you.
Next, we have, give me one moment. It does not appear we have any additional requests for public comment. Would you like me to close this feature?
Yes, moderator, please close. And I'm going to remind individuals, if something comes up that you think you would have liked to have said and didn't have a chance, please email the BCC. This is a pretty complex piece of regulatory discussion, so there may be stuff people think about later that they want to share. So we'd appreciate you to email into the BCC any comments that you may have. Thanks. With that, I think we do not have a recommendation from the committee. Is there further discussion, or would somebody from the committee like to make a motion, recommendation, or would somebody just like to make a comment to the licensing agencies for consideration as they, contemplate how to put together this merged group?
Committee Member Cermak, I see that your hand is raised. You can unmute yourself.
I apologize. I don't mean for it to be up.
That is okay. Are there any other committee members that wish to make a comment at this time? If so, please raise your hand. Chair, I do not see any. Oh, Committee Member Nevdal, your hand is raised. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
This is Committee Member Nevdal. I don't have a lot of experience with delivery, but it does seem to me that there has been a number of requests to increase the $5,000 threshold of cannabis goods that have been sold to $10,000. And I am happy to put that motion forward for consideration. Just before we wrap it up, I just want to acknowledge that not only did we hear it from the public, we had a number of those requests in writing. So I will put a motion forward and see if we end up with a second.
Do we have a second?
Before that, Committee Member Nevdal, we need you to formally state a motion.
My apologies. Committee Member Nevdal, I would like to make a motion that the regulatory or the licensing authority increase the $5,000 threshold for products sold to a $10,000 threshold.
So do we have a second?
Second by Beverly Yu.
We have a motion and a second. Since I don't believe I would have to check with council, but I don't believe there was any additional, discussion other than what was already the consideration that we talked about to increase it. Do we still go back to public comment? Very good. Okay, so since we do have a motion and a second, I'm going to ask our moderator to reopen for public comment for the motion to raise the.
Chair Farrow, before you, I saw Committee Member Baboulian had his hand raised, so I would like you to call on him just to see if he has any additional comments about the motion before you move to public comment.
Please do.
Committee Member Baboulian, if you had any additional comments, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Well, I did. One, I would restate everything I've already said about it. To add on to it, there was a comment about how the average or delivery order is $50. Even given the benefit and assuming the average ticket is $100, $5,000 is 50 orders. If the average delivery drop time is 15 to 20 minutes per order, that's 3 orders per hour. That's a full 16-hour, or more than a thing. That's 16-hour full workday for a $5,000 limit. I think we got a lot more other fights on our hands that we should be really giving serious consideration to. And to increase the limit right now with the pending litigation going on between the cities and the state is going to be very short-sighted. It's going to be a lot of ammunition for the local jurisdictions they don't have much to stand on. This is just going to empower them more. 5,000, again, it is a big limit as it is, and it's not low enough to justify giving up the ground that we're making in that lawsuit just to be able to increase it. The only people that this is really going to benefit is the larger delivery services. But again, if we're talking about providing access in times of COVID, we're talking about it in times of like the protests and stuff, the dispensaries that are allowed to deliver, they don't have that long of a distance to go to satisfy needing more than a $5,000 limit. again, I think we just got to be a little more practical about this one and weigh out the pros versus the cons. So I would really strongly oppose this.
Thank you for your comment. Do we have any other comments before we go back to public comment? Ms. Yu?
Perhaps it's more of a, hopefully a friendly amendment here. Would it be possible to not state 10,000 specifically and just have the Bureau take a look at increasing the cap?
Pardon me, this is Committee Member Nevedal, and I would be open to leaving it without a specified amount, yes. So I would accept that friendly amendment.
Great, I'm happy to second again if this is proceed.
Yeah, sorry, Ms. Yu. I was going to say, so we have a modified motion and the second has modified her second as well. Are there any other comments?
I need Committee Member Nevedal to restate her amended motion in a formal motion, please.
Well, I didn't write the motion down, my apologies. So I don't know that I can restate it for word for word. The big change is instead of requesting that the cap be extended to $10,000, can we please modify the motion to request that the licensing authority extend the cap?
So I can read you back what we have and then you can.
That would be helpful, thank you.
Yes, your original motion was that the licensing authorities increase the $5,000 threshold for products sold to a $10,000 threshold.
Can we strike to a $10,000 threshold and just stick with the first portion of the motion, please?
So it would be the licensing authority increase the $5,000 threshold for products sold.
Thank you. That is the amended motion or the friendly second, I believe. Yes.
And Committee Member Yu, are you seconding that amended motion?
Yes, thank you.
Thanks.
So we have a new motion and a new second. Do we have any other comment before I open this to public comment?
Hey, Jeff, just my comment that this is Member Clifford that I'm going to have to jump off the meeting.
Again, I thank you for your time today. Hopefully we get you back bright and early tomorrow.
You will. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you. Bye-bye. We will have a quorum with the loss of our committee member, but we will go to public comments. So moderator, can you open this up for public comment?
This is the moderator, and I have opened at the request of the committee the Q&A feature. If you would like to make a public comment, please click on the icon located in the lower portion of your screen and type "I would like to make a public comment." We will take all comments in the order they are received. Our first comment comes from Eddie Franco. Your microphone has been unmuted. Please keep in mind you will be given a minute and a half with a 20-second reminder.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. Thank you. My name is Eddie Franco, Legislative Liaison with the California Cannabis Industry Association. CCIA strongly supports increasing the cannabis delivery case limits from $5,000. We particularly support an increase to $10,000. In response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the cannabis industry has seen a significant increase in demand for delivery in every region of the state, and especially among seniors and vulnerable individuals. So we believe that such an increase will protect consumers by increasing access to safe and legal cannabis goods via delivery, rather than forcing them to risk their health by leaving home or buying from the unlicensed market. We actually detail more of this in item 15 of our regulatory document, but I do want to highlight that to date, there is no data to support the claim that larger amounts would impact public safety. In fact, we have data showing the opposite, that delivery is a safe and consistent mechanism for getting essential medicine to patients through the legal market. So we support this increase, and thank you for your time.
Next, we have William Perno. Your microphone has been unmuted.
Thank you. And I'm just trying to understand this motion. You're talking about increasing the threshold from $5,000 of sold product. And I'm curious why you're referring to it as sold product. It was my understanding that this was unsold product in a vehicle that's just kind of added onto the vehicle in case there's a new delivery order that comes in. So could the chair please clarify what the difference is between products that have been purchased with the delivery address and are being delivered versus products this is extra in the vehicle? Because it sounds like this is what you're asking for, to put extra products in a vehicle that are not sold, that there are just extra inventory in there. So I'd really like to know that. And it's common knowledge that the larger the amount of money or the amount of product is going to make that vehicle potentially a bigger target for criminals. And as you heard that one of the committee members talking about robberies that aren't being reported because of potential increases in insurance premiums and stuff. But why do we need a vehicle with $10,000 of unsold product if that's what your motion actually is versus sold
20
product?
seconds.
And for the person who wants to have a greener earth and climate control, you've now got a vehicle that's going to be bouncing around a jurisdiction from one location to the next versus a thought out planned delivery route with deliveries that are going to be more economically friendly for the business and the earth. Thank you.
Next, we have Rand Martin. Your microphone has been unmuted.
Thank you. This is Rand Martin on behalf of Caliva. I'd like to just make a couple of points. First, relative to the current litigation between the cities and the Bureau. This motion or an increase to 10,000 or whatever the dollar amount is not going to add additional ammunition. This is not a political debate. This is a judicial debate, a legal debate over whether the Bureau has the authority to make this imposition on the counties. So whether it's 5,000, 10,000, or 100,000, it's not going to have any impact on that. I would urge the committee to view this through the lens of the businesses themselves. We know that there are a lot of regulations that really restrict how businesses can operate, which has added to the black market in this state. We are trying to find ways to ease the burden on legal businesses. This is one of the very biggest issues facing business in the cannabis industry. And we would urge you to consider our perspective on how important this is and a reasonable response to that perspective so that we can begin to reduce some of the burdens on the industry that are not
20 seconds.
That are not based on evidence that justifies the existing regulation. Thank you.
Next up, we have Nasser. Your microphone has been unmuted.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to address this with additional time. We absolutely support BCC to evaluate the situation of each operator on a case-by-case basis. I think that's a very responsible decision since they are the regulator in the mix. Just to point out a couple of comments, based on our experience with the current model, it really forces us to operate like a pizza shop with a hub and spoke model. And that's clearly a safety issue for our drivers to basically have to come back and forth. And secondarily, Bay Area itself has over 6 million over 21 adults, a very large territory, and many of the jurisdictions have a ban. This really creates a major issue for us and honestly fuels the illicit market to a large extent because of some of these scenarios that tie our hand. Please approve BCC regulating this part of the case limit. It is a right and responsible decision for us to make for the industry. Thank you so much.
At this time, it appears we have, I stand corrected, an individual identified as Marnie. Your microphone has been unmuted.
Hi, the carbon footprint is actually about less patients having to drive to one location because it would be one truck making a delivery, and there's less back and forth to the main hub to pick up. Many times the orders are well into the hundreds of dollars, sometimes more than that, and oftentimes the deliveries are faster because people are together, and it wouldn't be uncommon for 2 or 3 people at one location to place orders. Yeah. So again, it is about saving the earth. We're in a climate crisis right now. So it would only make sense to help the earth instead of hurt it. Thank you.
This is a comment for the chair. Would you entertain second comments, or are we only doing one comment per?
At this time, we're doing one per. I think there's been a few others that have been cut off, and we've suggested that they submit it in writing.
Okay. With that, our next individual is Wesley Hine. Your microphone has been unmuted.
Excellent. I am speaking in support of the proposal to increase the limits. First off, I'll just reiterate, I do believe there's a fairly significant environmental benefit. Larger limits means fewer trips. Second is, I certainly understand.
Or nothing.
I'm sorry? I'm sorry, I was having trouble hearing.
Please continue.
Okay. I also certainly understand concerns about youth access. However, diversion of legal products is not where the youth is getting cannabis products. It is illegal delivery services that are carrying illicit products. This proposal would not impact that, and in fact would probably offset that by having a stronger regulated market. Thank you.
At this time, we have no additional requests for public comment. Would you like me to close this feature?
Yes, I would. Thank you. Very good. So we have a motion and a second for consideration. I'd like to call the roll.
So just to restate the motion, and Committee Member Nebdal, please correct me if I do not have it. The motion is that the licensing authority increase the $5,000 threshold for products sold. Is that correct?
That is correct. Thank you.
Thank you. And so I will go to Baboyan.
No.
And Farah.
Aye.
Heidelbach.
Nay.
Harada.
Aye.
Lynch.
No.
Nebdal.
Aye.
Heck.
Yes.
Todd.
Aye.
Williams.
No.
Woolsey.
Aye.
Wu.
Aye.
And you.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you very much for your work and the modifications to the motion on this so we could get something passed. We're going to move on to agenda item 4C, curbside delivery. Curbside delivery for questions for advisory committee. Should the Bureau develop regulations to allow retailers to conduct the sale of cannabis goods through curbside delivery? And if so, what should be included in these requirements? Current law, California Code of Regulations, Title 16, Sections 5402 requires that all sales of cannabis goods take place in the retail area of the retailer's licensed premise. The Bureau has provided an exception to this requirement as a form of disaster relief in response to the state and local social distancing mandates due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The Bureau's regulations do not currently contain provisions for retailers to provide curbside pickup. Considerations for the committee. Retailers should still be required to comply with all other requirements, including properly verifying the age or medicinal patient status of customers. Concerns regarding security of customers and the cannabis goods must be addressed. If curbside delivery is allowed permanently, the area where the curbside delivery is taking place should be subject to regulation as part of the licensed premise. So with that, I open it up for committee comments, questions, suggestions.
Any committee members wishing to make a comment on this agenda item, please go ahead and raise your hand. Committee Member Nevdal, I see that your hand is raised. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, hi, Committee Member Nevdal. I agree with all of the considerations, with the exception of I mean, I guess I have questions about the curbside pickup taking place on the licensed premise. I know there's been exemptions made to allow for curbside pickup while we've been dealing with the pandemic and we've had a lot of closures. But I am unclear and feeling unsure that in all cases, this is what's happening, that it's reasonable to expect that that pickup would happen within a licensed premise. So I'm just wondering about shared parking lots, for example, where you have an anonymous amount of spaces allocated to your business. Is it really feasible that in that setting you would be able to hold aside a curbside space, and or if you are relying on street parking, say? So I just if there was a way to better understand what is currently happening, is that the expectation or the expectation currently? And yeah, so I just have those questions, and I'll turn over the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Committee Member Nevdal. Any other committee members wishing to make a comment, please raise your hand. Chair Farrow, go ahead.
The one thing I would say is this particular item that we're discussing really shines a bright light on the need for the federal government to do something about safe banking. I mean, the fact that we take a fairly expensive product and we have a cash transaction outside of a secure premise does lend itself to some type of conversation that we really do need banking reform. So that's my comment.
Thank you, Chair. Are there any other members wishing to make a comment? Chair, I see no other hands being raised at this moment.
So we have no committee members ready to make a motion, so let's open up for public comment. Moderator.
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the committee, I have opened the Q&A panel. If you would like to make a public comment, please submit your request by clicking on the Q&A icon located in the lower portion of your screen and type, "I would like to make a public comment." We will take all comments in the order they are received.
And this is the co-moderator. I just want to again reiterate that for purposes of moving through the agenda, we are only having one comment per comment right now. If you want to provide additional comments, you can always send them to the Bureau at the Bureau's email, which is bcc@dca.ca.gov.
The first individual is William Perno. Your microphone has been unmuted.
Thank you. And I would like to note, just with Chair Farrell's comments there, that cash transactions outside of a store, secure premises there. We have conditional use permit requirements where I'm at in the city of San Diego that require customers going inside the establishment the use of metal detectors or wands to check for weapons before they go in there. And the concern would be with the curbside pickup that check's not being done and the marijuana is being brought to a vehicle where it could be easy getaway from there. And I recognize we have COVID-19, we have certain restrictions going on right now, and I understand the need for curbside pickup, but I would question, why is there a Bureau of Cannabis Control request for permanent curbside pickup? The hope is that with the vaccine and the pandemic being brought under control, that we won't necessarily need to have all these emergency regulations, which I understand and support. But they're higher risk of theft, being brought outside the secure location right to a vehicle. Could easily be grabbed and the vehicle drives away. You've got risk of injury to employees and things there. I'm just understanding during the pandemic, but why is there a push now for permanent
20 seconds
on this? And my final comment is for the co-moderator, if you could please increase the volume on your microphone. It's very hard to hear you. Thank you.
Next public comment comes from Rand Martin. Your microphone has been unmuted.
Thank you. Rand Martin on behalf of Caliba. We support extending curbside pickup beyond the every 30-day renewal that's currently in place. I think there are clearly security concerns as has been expressed, but we also believe that those can be mitigated through appropriate regulatory enforcement. Caliba, for example, does have security available outside the premises when people are pulling up for curbside pickup. There are things like that can be done to ensure. You can also make the purchase beforehand, as supermarkets are doing now. When they come out to bring out your groceries, you're not paying them. And you're sitting in the parking lot for those groceries, you have paid for them before. I would like to stress relative to the pandemic, as we're hearing from public health from coast to coast, this whole issue of social distancing and protecting ourselves against exposure to viruses is likely to go on beyond COVID-19. We are learning lessons that are very important to us as a society in terms of protecting ourselves. And so the idea that everything is going to be hunky-dory once the vaccine is approved and the infection rates have plummeted is just not the case. So we think that curbside pickup is for much longer than the length of this pandemic going to be necessary. Thank you.
Next, we have Eddie Franco. Your microphone has been unmuted.
Hello, committee members. Eddie Franco, Legislative Liaison with the California Cannabis Industry Association. We believe that the licensing authority should establish a regulation that permanently allows for curbside pickup. This will eliminate licensees having to continually request a 30-day extension and reduce staff hours devoted to having to evaluate and reevaluate and authorize these extensions by the licensing authorities themselves. As my colleague Rand Martin mentioned earlier, we are seeing that this is unfortunately looking like it's going to be the new normal, this new age of social social distancing and whatnot. So this will ease burdens on both the licensing agencies and the licensees themselves by creating a permanent regulation allowing for curbside pickup. We detail this more in item 16 of our regulatory document. Thank you so much.
Next, we have Tony Bowles. Your microphone has been unmuted.
Hello, once again, committee members. Tony Bowles, Bay Area Chapter of Americans for Safe Access. Curbside delivery has been vital for patients' access during the pandemic. We support making expanded delivery and curbside service, allowing dispensaries to deliver medical cannabis to qualifying patients and caregivers in a vehicle parked in the dispensary's parking lot, curbside pickup permanent. ASA conducted a survey to ask patients how they were dealing with COVID, how their community and government responded, and if the recommendations we provided to governors had an impact on their experience. The results showed overwhelmingly that patients appreciated the temporary regulations their state put in place. Thank you.
Next individual is Marnie. Your microphone has been unmuted.
Hi, everyone. I agree with the last three commenters. It keeps the public safer. People don't have to be standing in the same room. That would be great if it was permanent. And there's not necessarily cash transactions. In fact, I would think that they would get a credit card before, just like any online ordering, and then they just have it all ready for you, like picking, well, yeah. Thank you.
Next, we have Jason Sarouche. Your microphone has been unmuted.
I'm commenting and, oh, sorry, did I just get unmuted? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, members of the committee, my name is Jason Sarouche from the Getting It Right from the Start project at the Public Health Institute. I'm commenting in support of allowing curbside pickup to continue to be allowed until COVID-19 related precautions like social distancing requirements are lifted. I don't think this should be eternal. COVID should not be used as a pretext to legalize drive-through cannabis dispensaries, but I do think it is an important public health measure to be allowed until social distancing and whatnot is not required to keep this pandemic under control. Thank you.
Next, we have Robert Jones. Your microphone has been unmuted.
Thank you, Commissioner Robert Jones, JCG Management Group. On this one, I kind of disagree till we look a little bit further about traffic congestion and to make sure if they do have a parking lot or have something similar to a McDonald's drive-through where there's a window protection and they can get it that way. If we have it just in front of these different dispensaries and all over, there'll be traffic congestions, there'll be all sorts of issues. There could definitely be some robberies. I think we should look at this based on population and maybe make it a county by county situation. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, there are no additional requests for public comment. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Please, moderator.
This feature has been closed.
So committee, are there any thoughts that were jarred while we were taking public comment that may make you want to make a comment or recommendation or formal motion? If so, please raise your hand.
Committee Member Nevdal, I see that your hand is raised. You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you so much. So I will make a motion that the licensing authority develop a pathway by which curbside delivery may be allowed on a permanent basis so long as the local jurisdiction
authorizes it.
This is Vice Chair Heidelbach. I second that motion.
We have a motion and a second. We do have another committee member with their hand raised. Committee Member Babulian, would you like to make a comment at this point?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Davis. Comment I would make is that there's a reason why we have a licensed premises and everything's in there with the federal restrictions and prohibition on cannabis. Banking is a big issue. The cash transactions are a very big issue. Right now, almost nobody has a bank account. No credit cards are being processed. The majority of these transactions are cash. And if we're allowing for curbside pickup, all those transactions are being moved to the sidewalk. It does create a local issue with as far as like parking and traffic flow for a lot of the dispensaries. And here's the thing. The reason why we even have curbside pickup right now is because of the whole COVID shutdowns and cannabis businesses being deemed essential. And the Bureau's done a phenomenal job of stepping up to the plate and allowing for curbside pickup without without a lot of complaints or without anybody asking them to do it. So the Bureau's been very proactive with stuff like that. They haven't prevented it. It's still being allowed. And as the COVID situation develops, whether there's a vaccine, whether social distancing stuff are continue to be required, again, the BCC is showing its leadership in this, and they're allowing for it. Whenever the time comes where it's not necessary to provide it, again, the Bureau will step up and say, okay, we're done. Right now, it just requires the licensees to update their request every 30 days, which again, hasn't really created a problem, hasn't caused a problem. So on the curbside pickup, at least while at the federal level it's still a Schedule I drug, I'd be pretty hesitant about doing something on that and allowing for permanent regulations to be adopted. Another thing to take into consideration is if you allow for permanent curbside pickups, that minimizes a lot of the need for the type of location you have on the dispensary side. Most of these cars are pulling up to the sidewalk and conducting a transaction there. But if you've noticed the cigarette booths and stuff like that, where it's basically just a drive-through, those are the kinds of issues that you're going to start inviting. And if you're allowing for the transaction to occur away from, or the pickup to occur away from the premises where it's not contiguous, then you've got the whole delivery model. So again, it becomes a moot point. So those are just some thoughts I would put out there for consideration on this motion to make it permanent.
Thank you, Committee Member Babulian. Committee Member Nevdal, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Committee Member Nevdal. The intent of the motion isn't to expressly allow anything outside of the premise. The intent of the motion is simply to allow the BCC to, or the licensing authority, to utilize the regulatory process to allow this activity. We might be in a situation where curbside pickup is necessary for years to come. And a 30-day renewal of both the licensees and I would imagine from the licensing authority side can be quite onerous and just take up time and money. So I think that the broadness of the motion simply puts it back into the hands of the licensing authority to set good parameters around it. It doesn't assume any extra premise requirements or outside of premise requirements. It literally is to allow them to create a more streamlined process by which they can allow this through the regulations. Thank you.
Thank you,
Right,
Committee
this is
Member.
Aves.
Go ahead, Committee Member Babulian.
Sorry about that. This Avis, and to add to that, it's not authority that they don't already have. It's that same authority that allowed them to extend that for 30 days and require 30-day renewal. If this thing ends up being too protracted and the Bureau decides to change it from 30 days to requiring an update every 60 days, so be it. But again, we're not granting any authority that they don't already have, and it's the exact same authority that's allowing them to provide for curbside pickup today. Once you take the product outside of the door, you're outside of the premises. The sidewalk is the premises. Curbside pickup is the outside of the premises. If you're going to have curbside pickup, it's not like the customer's going to walk into the store, pay you, walk outside, wait for you to hand them off the product outside the premises. Certain local jurisdictions that allow for drive-through windows, none of this changes that. It still allows it. It's still part of their business model. It's still within the local control. And another thing to take into consideration is all these recommendations are for the draft regulations, which will probably be dropped later on in the year, which is going to go through public comment, which is all the stuff is going to be adopted sometime next year, mid-year. So again, we're talking about something that might not even be an issue a year from now. And if it is an issue, again, the Bureau has the authority to extend that as long as they wish to extend it. So why incorporate into regulations, make it solid and concrete, where it becomes a lot more difficult to unwind later on. Going back to the whole federal issue, we're creating unnecessary liability and a lot of issues that are conflicting directly with federal statute. So that's all I would have to add.
Thank you, Committee Member Baboyan. Are there any other committee members that wish to make a comment? Go ahead, Chair Farrow.
Well, I've already made a comment a little bit about banking, and I'll tell you, I will agree with you, Committee Member Baboyan, that our state had done a very good job on how to deal with the industry as essential workers. You know, we had a neighboring state in which we had a governor ban the sale of, you know, called them essential, ban the sale inside their stores when the facility had done a tremendous job of marking 6 foot between cases, resetting the cases so patients and consumers could see the products in virtually every case instead of having, the items separated by, this is the edibles and this is the, infused products and this is the inhalables and here's the flour. They actually rearranged their cases and were able to serve those patients and those consumers. Unfortunately, the state overreacted and locked everybody out of these essential businesses. That would be the more fearful. What happened then was, regardless of whether you're pushing people to the curb or putting them behind the wheel and delivering product, the sales per hour dramatically dropped for those licensed operators that had brick and mortar. And, I don't want to see a situation where, because some people don't want people inside, we diminish the amount of sales transaction based upon, a safe space to be able to conduct the transaction, accurately being able to report the sales, all the kind of things that, moving towards an outdoor sales could do. So I'm with you. I think our state did a great job and considering the circumstances, and I'm not so sure that we need to make this a permanent process for transactions, especially until we can have credit card and other ways of transacting the sale. So.
Thank you, Chair. Are there any other committee members wishing to make a comment? If so, please raise your hand. Chair, I do not see any additional comments from committee members.
Very good. We have a motion. We need to open back up for public comment. So do you want to read back the motion, or do we want to wait till after the public comments? Please do that.
So the motion is that the licensing authority develop a pathway by which curbside delivery be allowed on a permanent basis so long as the local jurisdiction authorizes it.
So this is the moderator, and at the direction of the committee, I have opened the Q&A panel.
Thank you, moderator.
An individual by the name of Lynn Silver, your microphone has been unmuted.
Thank you, ma'am. Lynn Silver at the Public Health Institute. It's nice to be in agreement with you, Avis, for once. We so often disagree. We think it's important that cannabis industry workers and dispensary workers be safe and that social distancing be respected through mechanisms like curbside delivery, but that should not be used to create permanent regulatory changes, and we strongly object to the use of the word permanent the temporary measures should simply be continued as long as necessary until state requirements and recommendations for social distancing are lifted. So I was disappointed to see the motion come in with the word permanent. That would not be appropriate. And why we should absolutely use it when necessary to keep workers safe.
Next, we have Marnie. Your microphone has been unmuted.
Hi, when I was talking earlier about curbside pickup being available, I actually thought that was meaning in addition to the store being open and having the opportunity, like if an immunocompromised person doesn't want to go stand inside, that they can pick up curbside, and it was an option to do both. But I still think it's a safer idea right now during the pandemic, but it would work as a dual. If the dispensaries like it and want it, it could be an option that it can either be drive-through or go inside. Thank you.
Next, we have William Perno. Your microphone has been unmuted.
Thank you, and I agree with Lynn Silver and committee member Bobolian that that 30 days can simply be extended for a longer period of time. This should be a temporary measure. And to Chair Farrell's comments about the sales at brick and mortar locations, what if you look at instead with making a modification to the physical building to allow the employee to be inside the building, but the customer to walk up to a window that's got a secure bulletproof glass. Money can be exchanged through that, much like you see at those kiosk type of gas stations that you walk up to. The clerk sitting behind a booth, the money is slid underneath there. The person gets the money, they give them the product, or they fill up their gas tank, or they buy some type of goods or services there. It takes care of the social distancing issues. You have an outdoor space for your customer. So if they're immunocompromised or other vulnerabilities, they're not directly indoors breathing the same air. Parking and queuing of vehicles is not an issue because you can find a parking space in the parking lot and then walk up. And again, the idea of making this permanent due to the COVID restrictions, if it's going to be continued for COVID, I agree with Lynn Silver. Keep those restrictions until the state deems that
20 seconds.
Keep the restrictions in the curbside temporary pickup until the state deems that it's no longer necessary. If you need to go more than 30 days so we don't have the burden on retailers having to submit new paperwork, I support that, but not permanent curbside pickup. It makes no sense. Thank you.
Next, we have Khurshid. Your microphone has been unmuted.
Thank you, moderator. Khurshid Koja from Greenbridge Corporate Counsel. While I absolutely agree with Chairman Farrow's comments about the need to pass safe banking, as chairman of board of NCIA, I heartily agree with that sentiment. That being said, however, I think that the motion to support making this permanent it has a lot of merit. As a cancer survivor myself, I would be immunocompromised in certain situations, regardless of whether there is a pandemic or not. So I would like to have the choice of going through a drive-through and picking up my cannabis. What's more, banks. I have banks in my town in Sacramento that have drive-through windows. So if banks can do it, there's no reason why we can't have cannabis retailers do that as well, starting with curbside, but then maybe we can evolve it as well to make it more secure. Thank you.
Currently, Mr. Chair, we have no additional requests. Would you like me to close this feature?
I would, thank you.
You're welcome. The Q&A feature has been closed.
Again, we have a motion and a second. Could you read that back and take the roll, please?
So the motion is that the licensing authority develop a pathway by which curbside delivery be allowed on a permanent basis so long as the local jurisdiction authorizes it. And with that, Baboyan,
No.
Farrow,
No.
Heidelback,
Aye.
Harada,
No.
Lynch,
No.
Nevdal,
Aye.
Heck,
No.
Todd,
Aye.
Williams,
No.
Woolsey,
Aye.
Blue,
No.
you.
Abstain.
Motion fails.
Committee Member Woolsey, your hand is raised.
I don't know why.
Oh. That's fine. Or any other committees members intending to raise their hand at this point?
Am I still unmuted?
Yeah, your mic was off too. Seeing no other hands, I'm trying to see if I don't see anybody else. We'll move on to agenda item number 4E, which is hours of operation, and we will not have a recommendation for 4C. So 4D. Hours of operation. Question for the advisory committee. Should the Bureau amend the allowed operating hours for retail sales at a licensed premise and through delivery? Current law, California Code of Regulations, Title 16, Section 5403 limits the hours of operation for retail sales from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. Retailers are prohibited from engaging in sales of cannabis goods outside the allowable operating hours. Considerations. Currently, retailers can only make sales during specified hours. The state hours of operation apply to all retailers. However, local jurisdictions may impose more limited hours of operation or operational hours, which licensees must follow. The Bureau does not receive many complaints related to retail operations being open late and causing a public nuisance, which may be attributable to the current operating hours. Additionally, from a security perspective, later hours often carry greater risk due to fewer people in public places and fewer law enforcement resources. Any changes to operating hours should take into account the impact on surrounding homes and security concerns. So I open this up to any comments, suggestions, or recommendations from our committee. And again, I would note that a lot of these are being placed here because we've probably received at the Bureau questions about hours of operations, probably from retailers, and this gives us a chance to weigh in. So that said, does anybody have any strong feelings one way or the other?
Any committee members wishing to make a comment, please go ahead and raise your hand. Chair, I am seeing that no hands are being raised for committee members.
Thank you, co-moderator. Therefore, let's open up public comment and see if there are any strong positions one way or the other by our public. Moderator, did I say committee or did I say public? Can we open up for public comment?
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the committee, I have opened the Q&A panel. If you would like to make a public comment, please click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen and submit, "I would like to make a public comment." An individual identified as Eddie Franco, your microphone has been unmuted.
Hi, committee members. Eddie Franco, Legislative Liaison with the California Cannabis Industry Association. I'll keep this comment brief. We just believe that state-level licensing authorities should not define or limit the hours of operation appropriate for cannabis licensees. These limits really should just be left up to and regulated by the local jurisdictions. Thank you so much.
Next, we have Jackie Subek. Your microphone has been unmuted.
Thank you. I'm Jackie Subek. I'm a consumption lounge licensee in West Hollywood. And yes, I have strong positions. Just as I spoke earlier, my comments are really specific to consumption lounges who, as we've discussed, are state licensed retailers or microbusinesses. Regarding hours of operation, so Section 5403 of the regs defines the closing time as 10 p.m. But cities like San Francisco and West Hollywood have thriving nightlives that frequently only begin at 9 p.m. Having to close our lounge doors at 10 o'clock prevents us from being able to participate in that commercial nightlife, while bars, clubs, and restaurants all maintain the freedom to remain open until 2 a.m. So, I mean, we have to trust our local governments to know their communities better than the state does. And if cities want to keep their lounges open until 2 a.m., as long as track and trace and security are maintained, why should that matter to the state? The other point is about the costs. Consumption lounges are very expensive to set up, much greater than a dispensary. Recouping those costs takes a lot of time. Even if we do conservative accounting, showing that we have to close our doors 4 hours earlier than the rest of the local nightlife, that could represent upwards of $1 million annually lost per lounge, which could be the difference between literal life and death in the marketplace. And it puts the lounges on an uneven playing field before they've even had a chance to get these pioneering businesses off the ground. I mean, remember, these lounges are new. They haven't even had a chance to spread their wings yet due to all these regulatory roadblocks. It's time to let us fly. Let us develop these new ideas without having to compete with unfair disadvantages right out of the gate. So I ask that you amend 5403 to expand the hours
20 seconds.
To expand the hours of operation to allow for an up to 2 a.m. closing time as decided by local control. Thank you.
Next public comment comes from Wade Laughter. Your microphone has been unmuted.
Yes, Wade Laughter with House of Harlequin. I am fully in support of increasing the hours of operation. It really makes sense to me that businesses be allowed to sort out for themselves in cooperation with their local jurisdiction what their hours of operation should be. I am fully supportive of the comments that have been made prior to my own. Thank you.
Our next public comment comes from William Perno. Your microphone has been unmuted.
Thank you. I'm not in support of increasing the hours past what they're currently at. If there's going to be an increase in hours, that should come from our state legislators. I want to note that there was a bill for the last couple of years by the alcohol industry to have either a 4 a.m. bar closure or a 3 a.m. bar closure. And both of those have failed at the state legislative level. And that was our state legislators saying no to that. So the idea of allowing businesses to be open later, again, we're back to consumption lounges, and are they going to turn into nightclubs, morphing into that? And the risks the later those businesses are open, the more impacts we're going to have to public safety and our roadways with impaired drivers. So please do not change the hours of operation. You've got plenty of access. You've got vehicle deliveries now that you're recommending for no cap on the amount of marijuana that can be delivered to somebody. You've got curbside pickup. Please don't endanger public safety by increasing the hours. Let the state legislators decide that time. Thank you.
Next public comment comes from Lynn Silver. Your microphone has been unmuted.
Oh, hi. Actually, I was just going to do the written comment, but since you called on me, we would oppose any extension of hours. There are many, many years of research from alcohol and other fields that show the concentration of negative social consequences of accidents, of incidents, of nuisances, of family conflicts in the late hours when associated with use of psychoactive substances, and particularly combinations of alcohol and cannabis, which may be more likely to happen late at night. So again, legal safe access is one thing. Building on the existing social problems from bars and nightlife is not a good idea. It would be counterproductive and increase harms from cannabis rather than creating a safer social environment for it.
Our next public comment comes from Marnie. Your microphone has been unmuted.
Hi, I'm in support of increasing the hours because why prevent them from staying open? Leave it up to the business owners who know their location and demographic and patient base best. Sometimes a patient will need some Rick Simpson oil really late at night. Cannabis keeps people alive, just like you want your pharmacy open late at night. There's no increase in impaired drivers. That didn't even make sense. Cannabis is not alcohol. Cannabis is peaceful. That woman said something about fighting. Cannabis is used to stop child abusers. It's not a hard drug and it's not addictive. And we need some education starting very high up and coming down to everybody about what cannabis is and what it isn't. Thank you.
Our next public comment comes from Max. Your microphone has been unmuted.
Thank you. Max Picolos on behalf of Flow Cannabis Company. I'd like to echo the comments of CCIA and others. This should be an issue of local control where we have an up to 2 a.m., for example, cap, that local jurisdictions could go and decide for themselves what is the appropriate hours of operation for retailers in their jurisdiction. Unlike comparisons to alcohol, just because that the state regulation would say up to 2 a.m. does not mean that the businesses would have to be or the locals would have to allow to 2 a.m. Additionally, I want to reiterate there are strong existing security requirements for guards, cameras, with local jurisdictions for lighting and things of that nature. And then lastly, if legal cannabis is not available after 10 p.m., then the unlicensed cannabis industry and unlicensed operators would be happy to fill that consumer need. So we ask that you support legal cannabis and allow for local flexibility in hours of operation. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, we have received no additional requests for, I take that back. We just received an additional request. Ed Brown, your microphone has been unmuted.
Hi, thank you. This is Ed Brown again, Original Equity Group. I think I share some of the sentiments. I do believe that the Bureau of Cannabis should not be in control of setting a time limit at all on retailers. But for the sake of the argument, I think I would be okay with an up to 2 a.m. or an up to 4 a.m. proposal. I think what the gentleman said previously about us combating the unregulated market, they're outdoing us because they're open all hours of the day. And so you have a point there in being able to combat that. Then the Bureau let's try to do that. I think the other point of this is speaking to the lounges. Consumption lounges are new. There are a lot of costs involved, and so being able to have a lounge is be a part of this carve out is just important for retailers. And I think the second part of this is that we're 2 years into this market. Where's the harm? Where's all those comparisons comparing this to alcohol, and where's all the deaths, and where's all
20
the
seconds.
road rage damage? So let's please stop listening to the arguments of comparing this to alcohol, and we need to start comparing this more so to sugar, which is, we understand that sugar is a toxic substance, but we make allowances for that to be sold in retail marketplaces. Thank you for your time.
We have no additional requests for public comment. Would you like me to close this feature?
Yes, please, moderator. So unless there's any strong feeling one way or the other, please make a recommendation, or we can move on to the last item on the agenda. We have no motion. Is there a motion from anybody about hours of operation? Seeing no motion, we'll move on to item E, 4E, minor decoy requirements. And before we do, I'm going to just let people know we're going to have I believe we're going to have a hard stop, not believe, that we'll have a hard stop at 4:30 today. I wanted to check with other committee members if there was anybody who had to leave before that, so that way we can maintain a quorum. If we're unable to complete 4E, we will carry it over to tomorrow. If we carry it over to tomorrow, it'll be the first agenda item. And then we will go out of order and take items not on the agenda. So that way we can ensure the public has an opportunity to raise items that are not on this. I do believe there may be some committee members who want to raise some items in that as well. And then we will proceed to the agenda as it was written. We will limit the comments from 1.5 minutes to 1 minute. Again, realizing that if you cannot completely put forward your thoughts, you can always email them to the BCC for consideration. So with that, any committee members have challenges that will make them have to leave prior to 4:30?
Committee Member Napoleon, I see that your hand is raised. Is that to let us know that you will be having to leave?
Yes, I have to leave in a couple of minutes.
Give me 1 minute while we look at our numbers to make sure that we can maintain a quorum at least through 4:30. Is there anybody else that will need to leave? We have a very tight quorum right now. If I don't see any hands, we're going to proceed with the reading of item E, minor decoy requirements. Seeing none, it looks like we can move. Question for the advisory committee. Is the use of minor decoys feasible? Should the requirements for minor decoys be changed? And if so, what should the requirements be? Current law, BPC, section 26140, and California Code of Regulations, Title 16, section 5805, allow peace officers to use minor decoys, persons under the age of 21 years of age, for the purpose of enforcing commercial cannabis laws. Minor decoys may attempt to purchase cannabis from licensees, and the minor decoy is immune from prosecution for purchasing or attempting to purchase cannabis goods. The current regulation section includes requirements that the minor decoys be under 20 years of age, carry their own or no form of identification, honestly answer questions about the minor decoy's age, and if possible, have the minor decoy identify the person that sold him or her cannabis goods immediately after the purchase. Considerations. Although the law allows the use of minor decoys to ensure compliance with state law and regulations regarding the sale of adult use cannabis goods to persons under the age of 21 years of age, the law does not address whether it is safe for a minor decoy to engage in these activities. For example, law enforcement officers cannot watch the decoy in the retail premises as they would have to show their ID to enter the licensed premise. Additionally, if minor decoys use their own identification or have deliveries made to their address, this may result in safety concerns that are not present when purchasing at a store, while using no identification would prevent placing a delivery order. Current minor decoys provisions are similar to those used to enforce alcohol-related laws. However, the way the cannabis industry operates is quite different than the alcohol industry. So with that, I'll open it up to committee members. I'm sure we might have some conversation.
Committee Member Nepdal, I see that your hand is raised. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you, Committee Member Nevedal. Can we get clarification? Are minor decoys only used in the case of licensed facilities, or are they also used in investigating unlicensed facilities?
I will ask counsel to respond to that.
Hi, this is Angela McIntyre from the Bureau. The Bureau's regulations identify the use of minor decoys for enforcing the regulations against licensees.
Committee Member Nevdal, if you wanted to unmute yourself and if that answers your question.
It does. I guess I'm struggling a little bit with the question here in the considerations, and this was why I asked, because of the question about whether or not it is safe for the minor decoy to engage in these activities, and then I think the safety considerations are very different if the minor decoy is engaged in investigation in an unlicensed facility versus a licensed facility. These licensed facilities, theoretically, according to regulations, wouldn't have a license if they didn't have cameras and recordings and protocols in place, and safety procedures. So that was why I asked. Thank you for clarifying.
This is Chair Farrow. I think the intent of this paragraph for consideration has to do with the fact that most establishments that sell alcohol sell other goods and don't require you, at least unless you're going into a bar or a portion of a restaurant that is for those that are 21 or older. So like in liquor stores, grocery stores, mini marts, things like that, the minor doesn't need to present a valid license of underage to get in the establishment. Once that license is entered in a cannabis facility, the data is in the system. And they probably can't be allowed to use a fake ID, because then that would undermine the investigation. I could be wrong, and I would ask legal for opinion on that. And then if they're doing delivery, it would be delivered to their home. And again, the entity would know where the the minor lived and there could be retaliation, I guess, is the concern, is that how I read this, that there's a concern for retaliation, not necessarily in the store at the moment, but having their personal data being available to the licensed or non-licensed retailer.
Hi, this is Angela McIntyre again from the Bureau. I think the Bureau is seeking guidance on whether there are sufficient measures in place to ensure the safety of minors, depending on the types of situations they find themselves in. Regarding the use of fake IDs, as noted in the meeting documents, minor decoys must use their own identification and may not use falsified information.
If there are any other committee members wishing to make a comment, please raise your hand. Chair, I am seeing no other committee members with their hands up.
Seeing none, I'll ask the moderator to open up the public comment.
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the committee, I have opened the Q&A panel. If you would like to make a public comment, please click on the Q&A icon located in the bottom portion of your screen and type, "I would like to make a public comment." All comments will be answered in the order they are received. I will now pause a moment to allow individuals time to access this feature. An individual identified as Wade Laughter, your microphone has been unmuted.
Yes, thank you. Wade Laughter here. And it seems to me that when a minor goes into a dispensary, the dispensary has all kinds of video surveillance, and the amount of effort, cost, and risk associated with opening one of these businesses, they're not going. I would think this decoy program in the cannabis space for legal dispensaries anyway would be there would not be a lot of folks who would engage with a minor knowing that they could risk losing their license. To me, it almost seems like a problem, a solution looking for a problem. It's really not, I don't see the danger for these minors entering a premise where they're videoed the entire time they're in that building. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Our next public comment comes from Lynn Silver. Your microphone is unmuted.
Thank you, Lynn Silver, Public Health Institute. My understanding is that these provisions do not create any obligation to use minor decoy programs. What they do is establish certain protections for minor decoys, and I'd have to go back and read them again, the institutions that may be contracting with them in the event that they are needed. So they are important to have on the books in case you ever need minor decoy operations. Minor decoys have been used extensively in tobacco to protect against underage sales. It's a very important and useful enforcement mechanism. While clearly most of the cannabis dispensaries are checking IDs, we really don't have good data to show how big the problem there is or is not. I haven't seen one, but it's very possible that a few years from now there might be. So it's important to maintain the ability to use minor decoys, and that local government can have the flexibility to make use of that strategy if they deem it necessary. Where it may be more necessary is in the delivery space. I've only seen one small study so far from San Mateo County, where they did find that 40% of the studied delivery operations did not require uploading of an ID on ordering, and 40% did not verify the identification of the person when they delivered. So that does suggest that there are problems in the ID space. I think you're right that, using someone's home address might be a problem there. So that, is something that local government and BCC need to figure out. but the protections from the ability to use minor decoy strategies and the legal protections for those individuals are important to maintain on the books, even if it's determined that they're not necessary at this time for dispensaries.
Our next public comment comes from William Perno. Your microphone has been unmuted.
Thank you. And I would agree with, again, with Lynn Silver's comments. And also keep in mind that you're talking about making curbside pickup permanent. And while you might have an ID check for a minor going into a retail operation, if you have a minor in the car, then it's going to be incumbent upon that employee to do the proper age verification there. And there are devices that can scan an ID and can tell the person how old the person with the ID is. It does the math for them, but we see that even in businesses with alcohol and tobacco where employees can circumvent that by entering in their own date of birth or the year 1900 for someone. For the officers and the minors themselves using their own ID, I believe that there are plenty of undercover officers in police departments that have state issued identifications that are not under their true name and use different addresses there. I don't know if that could also be done for a minor where it lists their same age, so it meets the requirements that they are that age, but perhaps uses a different name or address. And for those deliveries, law enforcement can work with apartment communities as an example to use a vacant apartment.
20 seconds.
So law enforcement can work with an apartment community to use a vacant apartment as a delivery address so that it's not exposing the minor's true home address there. There are a lot of opportunities, but the fact is we need to make sure that the retailers are complying with the law and not selling to people under age 21. And we hope that they turn away minors.
Time had been reached. Our next public comment comes from Paul Hansberry. Your microphone is unmuted.
Hi, yes, I just want to concur with Mr. Laughter. And also, it seems like this decoy is better used for non-licensed operators to compound the charges, because every dispensary I've ever been to checks the ID. I'm 66 years old, and they still check my ID every time that I come in. So that's all I got. Thank you.
Our next public comment comes from Marnie. Your microphone is unmuted.
Hi. The dispensaries are so strict. I would say don't waste time and effort and money. What's the data so far? I'm sure there's been some sort of research into this. So what is it? Is this a problem? And the word safe, I guess define safe. No one gets by the door guy if they don't have a valid ID. Then you have to go check in. If you haven't been to a dispensary, I invite you to have that experience. They're strict and it's interesting. And talking about safety of minors, there are a lot of young patients that are in need of cannabis. It's safer than Ritalin. I personally know a 7-year-old and a 13-year-old that have conditions, and cannabis has kept them alive.
A reminder to go ahead.
This is the co-moderator. I just want to let the public know again that this is public comments on the use of minor decoy and the requirements. And so that is what we are taking public comment on at the moment. If you can please keep your comments to that, we would really appreciate it. Thank you.
This is the moderator. I'm going to go ahead and unmute Marnie. If you can please stick to what the topic is, you can have the remaining time that was available. You are unmuted.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I just get passionate. They would tell you to leave. They're just so strict. It just seems like money spent better for another part of the budget. And maybe instead of policing, there could be some sort of community outreach, something positive. And there's a lot of teams that
10
buy
seconds.
alcohol, and I think the concentration might be better spent on that, alcohol in teens. Thank you.
At this time, there are no additional requests for public comment. Would you like me to close this feature?
Please do, moderator. So committee members, we don't have a recommendation as of yet. If there are any recommendations or comments, please raise your hand.
Committee Member Neville, I see that your hand is raised. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Committee Member Neville, I do not have a recommendation. I just wanted to ask the question, is there anything that prohibits the licensing authority from just developing additional regulations around this topic as the need arises?
That can be backed up by legal. Yes, they can, and they will be addressing on how they move forward on ensuring that minors don't get access to this. It's just going to require something different than alcohol.
Correct. This is Angela McIntyre from the Bureau. Any regulations that are adopted would need to be consistent with those enumerated in section 26-140 of the Business and Professions Code, which outlines the authority to utilize minor decoys.
Great, thank you. I have no further comment.
Ms. Nevedal, do you have any additional comment? Oop, nope, I guess not. Well, seeing no additional hands, I assume we are going to go without making a formal recommendation and allow the decision on how to enforce against illegal sales to minors will be conducted with the merging agency. And with that, we will be adjourning for the day. We will start with the agenda item for items not on the agenda. And then we will move into agenda item 5 and finish with a discussion, hopefully, with future agenda items and discussions of other meeting dates, because we will have to talk about a meeting to prepare for our year-end report and maybe some other things that we want to try to tackle before the year's end. So with that, be safe. Have a great evening. I look forward to reconvening tomorrow morning at 10 a.m.